Right along. We'll move on to the consent item, and that's the approval of the minutes of the December 7th, 2020 meeting. Anyone, any questions on
Ballard
that?
moves the minutes.
Seconded by Frericks.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any questions? And Renee, do we have any public comments on the?
No, we do not have any public comments for the consent calendar, but I do need to do a roll call vote for the consent calendar.
That's right. Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and go to roll call.
Thank you. Directors Bernasconi?
Shall I abstain since I was not present?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And Burris is absent. Frericks?
Aye.
Gog?
I'd like to abstain as I wasn't in the last meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Abstain.
Ballard?
Aye.
Thomas is absent, and Vice Chair Kozlowski
Aye.
and Chair Saragosa.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Renee. All right, moving right along on to our action items, and that is Policy and Innovation Committee charge. And Mr. Johnson has this for us this morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Every year, each of the 3 board policy committees adopts a charge. And I know that the new members were at an orientation last week, but for the benefit of the whole committee, just wanted to briefly kind of touch on what the charge of this committee is and some of the things that are coming up this year. So the Policy and Innovation Committee has jurisdiction over several things at SACOG. The first area is our state and federal advocacy work, or the policy work. And you'll hear from Christina Locke a little bit later this morning about some of our advocacy efforts. We also are the committee that works on communications and engaging elected officials. So in past years, this has meant tours that have been associated with a cap-to-cap trip or tours to other regions of the state or other parts of the country, other mid-sized regions. We also are the administrative committee, and so human resources, budget, purchasing, contracting issues all go through this committee. And we're also the committee that oversees the innovative work at SACOG. So things like Civic Lab are kind of chartered at this committee, and though the subject matter may determine kind of what committee they exactly are carried out on. So for instance, the Civic Lab has focused on land use related issues. It's been talked about at the Land Use Committee. Other transportation work has been going to the Transportation Committee. So the recommendation today is to adopt this charge, which hasn't changed since last year. But first, if there's any questions about the charge or the year ahead, I'd be happy to answer any of those.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Are there any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'll move to approve if there's no question.
Second, Kozlowski.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, do a roll call vote here.
Great, thank you. Directors Bernasconi?
Yes.
Thank you. Burris is absent still. Frericks?
Aye.
Thank you. Gog?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Yes.
Ballard?
Aye.
Thomas is absent. Vice Chair Kozlowski
Aye.
and Chair Saragosa?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Renee. All right, moving along, we'll move to the transit representation and the metropolitan planning organization structure. And again, this is Mr. Johnson.
Hello. Okay, so this item relates to our Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, role at SACOG. If you'll remember, SACOG has 2 different roles in transportation as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the 6-county area, and that's kind of governed by federal rules. And we have a state level regional transportation planning agency role, or RTPA, which covers the 4 counties of Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba. One of the federal requirements is that every MPO across the country has to look out for the needs of transit, public transit providers specifically in its governance. And the way that SACOG and many other MPOs do this is through having a resolution that identifies those of you who represents the interests of public transit through a city or county run transit agency, or you sit on the board of one of the transit providers in the region, that fulfills that representation requirement. So every year we adopt a resolution that indicates that that's how we comply with this federal requirement. If you're interested, we also have on our website, on our directory of the board of directors, it shows kind of which transit agencies our board members sit on, so that the public and you can have full transparency about how public transit is represented in the decisions at SACOG. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Is there any questions? Comments?
Yeah, actually, Michael, just Mr. Chair, one quick question.
Yes.
I apologize. My sound cut out just for that last part for Eric. Where is that found?
Okay.
Where is that information found of who sits on what?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so on our website, the board directory, there's actually a little transit icon there, and then we have information about which transit agency boards every member is on. And we try to update that as soon as we get the information, but we're updating that for the beginning of this year right now.
Great, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Lucas. Any other comments? Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
this is
Director
Stoller. I think I'm actually hitchhiking on what we just heard from Lucas. I'm on a transit board along with Lucas. How do I verify that I'm shown on this list? The list isn't updated yet. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We are still in the process of updating the list. So there's it looks like right now we show that you're on the YCTD board, but if you're on other boards, we can update that information.
No, that's sufficient. Thank you.
Okay.
So Eric, would it be helpful if we told you which ones we're on right now to speed things along?
That would be great. We can, we'll actually, in our follow-up for the board meeting, I'll have Lynette ask that if you can just confirm your attendance on any transit agency boards. Thank you.
Sounds good. So do you actually need a motion on this item, or is this just a heads up?
This is an action item, so we do need a recommendation to the full board to adopt a resolution.
I will move the item then.
Thank you, Mike.
Lozano, second.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Yes, can the committee member who did second verify their last name?
That was Lozano.
Perfect, thank you, Lozano. Okay, Directors Bernasconi?
Yes.
Thank you. Burris is absent. Frericks?
Aye.
Gog?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Yes.
Stallard?
Yes.
Thomas is absent. Vice Chair Kozlowski?
Yes.
And Chair Saragosa?
Yes.
Great, the motion carries.
All right, thank you. All right, this is moving along. We'll see what kind of record I have here. We're moving along on a good clip. All right, we're going to move on to the information items and item 4, which is our advocacy update. And Ms. Locke has this for us this morning. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning, thanks. I'm Christina Locke, the policy manager here at SACOG, and today I'd like to build on my advocacy presentation to the board from a couple of weeks ago, and also provide an update on our Green Means Go advocacy activities. 2021 is really ushering in many changes relevant to SACOG, both in DC and at the state capitol. Obviously in DC, there's quite a bit of change with the change in administration, and with it, we will likely see some new direction in policy. And this year is also a year where we see the expiration of the funding and authorization measure for surface transportation infrastructure planning and investment. It's called the FAST Act, or the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. And the FAST Act expires at the end of the federal fiscal year this year, which is on September 30th. Now, the FAST Act was originally passed in 2015 as a 5-year measure to govern federal surface transportation spending. And with this 5-year time frame, it helped provide some certainty of funding, providing for planning and implementation of long-term transportation projects. It originally expired last year on September 30th of 2020, but it was extended for 1 year at existing funding levels. And in the lead up to the expiration, both the Senate and the House passed some form of reauthorization last year. However, only the House passed a comprehensive measure. The House seems to appear to continue to favor the measure that had previously passed last year. It remains to be seen what the Senate will be doing moving forward. They only passed a small component of total reauthorization. And then obviously, again, with some of the changes happening in DC, it's still a little unclear what route the Senate wants to take this year. And if history sheds any light, we could see more simple extensions of the FAST Act occur before an agreement is reached on a new measure. So essentially kicking the can down the road over multiple years. That's what we've seen happen in past years through this. Also, definitely not a new concept, but infrastructure remains high on the list of conversations, both from a potential stimulus perspective and then also through reauthorization. And last summer, we worked with numerous public agencies and other stakeholders in the region to identify potential stimulus infrastructure projects. This resulted in a list of over $11 billion in potential projects for our region that we could implement quickly if our region receives stimulus funding. And this can serve as a guide for our infrastructure conversations this year. We've begun meeting again with our congressional delegation about this. We met with them last summer and we're circling back with them again in this new year. The meetings have been very positive, and there appears to be continued interest in some sort of package that our region should be well positioned for. We're also including Green Means Go in these conversations, and this is our program to accelerate infill development in areas throughout our region. Now, obviously, infrastructure has been a hot topic, quote unquote, for many years now. So again, it remains to be seen if something will happen, but in our meetings with some congressional members that we've met with so far, at least on the House side, there definitely seems to be a strong interest in trying to move something forward this year. So moving now on to the state capitol. There are 2 weeks left for legislators to introduce legislation this year. And the rate of legislation has been somewhat relatively slow, although it has picked up in the last week or so. There are some trends already related to the issues we follow. Housing remains a major focus, as does climate and regional planning. Those continue to be a major focus for legislators, as well as the issue of wildfire mitigation and prevention. Another big issue we expect to be on the table this year is changes to SB 375. So SB 375 passed in 2008, and it directs the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, to set regional targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And SACOG must include a sustainable community strategy in our regional transportation plan that demonstrates how the region will meet those greenhouse gas emission targets that CARB sets. And Green Means Go is a key component of all of this. So the board, you will be hearing quite a bit about 375 from us and sustainable community strategies, or we shorten it to SCS, quite a bit this year, both in terms of advocating for Green Means Go funding, as we participate in conversations about potential changes to the existing law, SB 375, and then also as we begin planning for our next regional transportation plan update, which again also includes the sustainable community strategy. In terms of changes in 2021 that will impact our work, this year brings new chairs for both the Senate and the Assembly Transportation Committees. It's still early to see the full impacts of these changes, but similar to a federal change in administration, we could and likely will see a shift in legislative priorities and what moves through the legislative process. This also removes some of the previous institutional memory on many of the big issues facing transportation, and each chair brings with her new perspectives and priorities Also interesting, the previous chairs were both from Northern California, and now the new chairs are both from Southern California. So there's that shift as well. There's also changes at the California Air Resources Board, CARB, with the retirement of the longtime chair, Mary Nichols, and the appointment of the new chair, Leanne Randolph. And there's also been an appointment of a number of new board members as well. And this change, and these changes are worth noting, in particular related to SB 375, again, given CARB's role in setting regional targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and our sustainable community strategy that we have to put forward. And so this all leads me to Green Means Go. I want to provide a little bit of an update on Green Means Go, and then for the new members, want to just do a little bit of background on Green Means Go. Again, this has been a focus for advocacy since 2018, when the California Air Resources Board set our region's new target for greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles. And when they did this, they gave us and our counterparts in the Bay Area, Southern California, and San Diego regions the same target, a 19% reduction. However, they acknowledged that our region is different from those other regions in land use patterns, transit, et cetera, for a number of reasons I think we all know very well. And so they called on SACOG to identify a pilot program to help us reach that target. And Green Means Go is that pilot. And so again, we're the only region that has a pilot explicitly called out in the setting of the new GHG reduction targets. And so with Green Means Go, we want to lower greenhouse gas emissions by accelerating infill development in our region through infrastructure investments, and then pairing that with reducing and electrifying vehicle trips. We're asking for the state to help fund the program, focusing on the need for major infrastructure improvements throughout our region to help facilitate infill development, things like sewer, water, drainage projects, really looking to fill a space that was taken away when we saw the loss of redevelopment. And when we say infill development, we're talking about places throughout our entire region. We're not just talking about urban core areas. We're talking about old commercial corridors, downtowns, main streets. There's really opportunities throughout our entire region. And so Green Means Go, we talked, I think, a little bit about this previously, but it really is a local ground up approach to meeting the state's mandates. And it recognizes that even within our region, we have very different geographies and communities. We're a blend of urban, suburban, rural, each with its own benefits and challenges. And so trying to meet that one mandate of a 19% target really is going to require a local approach in order to do that. And so we've met now with almost our entire legislative delegation this year. We've met with our entire delegation in previous years as well. And they continue to remain supportive and engaged. In past years, we've focused primarily on the budget process since this is a state budget ask. This year, we are also looking to likely sponsor a policy bill, and this would move us along two tracks. We would continue with our focus on the budget, but it would also allow us to have an organizing tool for our advocacy efforts. So we would introduce a policy bill that establishes a framework for the program while we're continuing to advocate for the funding through the budget process. And so all of you in this committee will be key to our advocacy efforts, and your support and participation has been and will continue to be instrumental, particularly as we're meeting with legislators in the Capitol, testifying at committees, building up stakeholder support, et cetera. As part of this, as just a reminder, we've asked you all to fill out a quick survey online, identifying legislators you have a relationship with and your willingness to reach out to them on behalf of SACOG. Many of you, thank you, have already filled this out. And if you have not, please do so as soon as possible. I believe the original link to the survey came in an email from Lynette. So just let her or me know if you'd like us to send it to you again. We use these results very often. Most recently this year, we've been, like I said, meeting with our legislative delegation about Green Means Go. And it's been crucial to have our directors in those meetings with legislators talking about the potential impacts that funding could have in your joint constituency communities. And so that's my overview of our year ahead, both federal and state.
Great, thank you, Christina. Yes, Director Stollard.
Christina, I want to tell you with all humility, I can't hear as fast as you can talk. And I'm also more visual than oral, so I need to see things in writing. It would be very helpful in the future if your reports at least had a listing of the bills you're going to talk about and just a one sentence or two sentences about what the bill basically encapsulates, so that it's easier for us to absorb and follow the discussion. It's important stuff, and I need to hear it again and again and see it again and again. So a little bit more, I've been flipping around here, and the staff report is basically a skeletal report. So I need more, and I would be grateful if you try to do that. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll definitely do that. I think PowerPoint presentation is probably the best way to do that, since these reports have to be completed a few weeks before the committee presentation. And as you know, the legislature moves pretty quick. So that provides a little bit of a challenge for the staff reports, but I'll work on PowerPoint presentations if that works for the future.
Either that, or it's just a few paragraphs, like an actual written report. Then I kind of know what you're going to be talking about, and I can even think about questions I might have. But when it comes just orally, rapid fire, as you've just done, I'm at sea. Thank you.
Yeah, Christina, your presentation is content rich. And it would actually, to the extent that we can, Mr. Chairman, possibly what we need to do is dedicate more time to Christina's reports so that we can have her break it up into chunks, because there was probably a good spot at a couple of places in what you talked about, Christina, to ask for some questions for myself. And then, you know, since we have new membership, so just a suggestion.
I agree, Vice Chair. I think we could almost spend most of our time just talking on that update. So I think that's a good suggestion there.
Yeah, and I do have a question related to the content. When you mentioned that the director of CARB chair was changing hands, do you think that there is some philosophical difference between the new director and the former that is going to meaningfully change how it is that we interact with them, or what, you know, ways that they're going to look to enforce AB 375 or any of the related measures?
Thanks for the question. You know, I think it's probably a little bit too early to know exactly how her role is going to play out when it comes to CARB. She's coming over. She's well, I guess in transition, she's coming over from being a commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission. And so she does have some experience in that regulatory background. She also previously, I believe, was an attorney at the California Natural Resources Agency and worked for, I believe, the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission. She's an attorney by background, has worked also in some law firms. So pretty extensive background there. In terms of our actual policies as it relates to CARB, again, I think that's still a little bit to be determined. We are in the process of trying to get a meeting with her. As you can imagine, you know, schedule and transition, you know, it's probably not going to be till a little bit later in the year, but we are going to use this as an opportunity to both introduce and meet with her, but then obviously talk about Green Means Go, which will be crucial as we advocate for that, since again, this did come from a little bit of direction from CARB.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mike, I'll add a little bit to that too, because I sort of follow CARB for my day job as well. You know, with the new chairperson, you know, back when Ms. Nichols was in there, there was some concern. It was expressed at her next to last meeting of communities of color not being adequately heard by the board. And so I think there will be some sensitivity to that as it intersects with policies that come out of CARB. And I think the governor's office heard that when they were going through their appointments process. So we'll have to wait and see what that actually means. And Christina's right, it's early on. I mean, and then there's just some vagaries of CARB rules where the chair is really the only person that has staff and it's only full-time position on the board. So there's really a deficit of information sometimes to the other CARB board members, except through the chair's office. Like the chair in the last office, only you had to make appointments to see the other board members through the chair's office if you didn't have like a personal connection with them. And so it tended to place a lot of the power just within that one office. So we'll have to see if there's more of a egalitarianism, for lack of a better term, as this moves forward. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the sort of the new regime plays out. But just some context as well, on the recent changes.
Yeah. Are all of those board seats appointed by the governor, or do they come by on some other means?
I believe there's 2 ex officios from the legislature. And Lucas, I don't know if if there's any other.
Yeah, there are a couple of ex officio seats by the legislature, but they're actually legislators. But there are several seats that are actually appointed by the legislature as well too. So the Senate has a seat and a assembly seat. Yeah. They're typically not elected officials. I mean, they're current elected officials. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to nominate you, Lucas. So
exactly. Well,
because you got nothing better to do, right?
Exactly.
The local air boards as well. Like I know the Central Valley has an appointment to the board. I think the others do too. And they're nominated by the local boards, but then they still have to be approved by the governor's office as well. Any other questions or comments? Christina, I did have one, and I just want to say thank you, and that is for bringing the Green Means Go conversation into the federal discussions as well. I think it's important to kind of hit it from both the state and local side. So it's good to have our congressional delegation also be part of those discussions. So thank you for that. And then you mentioned potential changes to SB 375. Do we have a sense of what those changes might be that we could be anticipating with that legislation?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there's been a bill introduced already by Senator Allen, which makes a number of changes that are probably on the side of some things we would want to engage on and see changes to. We've also heard that the new Assembly Transportation Chair is interested in doing a bill to put, I believe the quote was, more teeth into 375, but we haven't gotten any specifics on that or seen any language. And then I know a new senator from the Bay Area who used to sit on MTC in the Bay Area, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, our counterpart in the Bay Area. He is very interested in introducing something. Not sure. I think, I believe, I don't want to start a rumor, I believe a bill is going to be introduced before the deadline in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure exactly yet what the components of that are going to be, but I believe that they are seeking feedback from MTC. And so as part of this, there's multiple stakeholder group conversations, if you will, that we're engaging on, both at the state with state administration level, and then in particular with what we call the Big Four, so the 4 largest MPOs, again, regions, Bay Area, San Diego, and Southern California. The advocacy staff of the Big Four have been talking about 375 quite a bit and what we might collectively want to advocate for. So again, probably still a little soon to know exactly what's going to happen. The other sort of piece that I keep hearing is that this is such a big lift and such a big conversation, particularly with having new transportation chairs on both sides, both houses, that probably should expect this to be a 2-year process. So just a quick reminder, the state legislature, it's a 2-year session. And so we're at the first year of the 2-year session. So a bill that's introduced this year can continue to be worked on through next year. So potential for that to happen again, because it could be such a big issue to work on.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Any other questions for staff? All right, seeing none. Christina, thank you for the presentation, for all of your work. I know you crammed a lot into a little bit amount of time, so thank you. Okay, we're going to go on then and move to item 5, which is SACOG's role in fair housing issues. And Dov has this presentation for us. Good morning.
Morning, committee members. My name is Dov Caden. I work on the planning team here at SACOG. I'm going to leave my video off. I have spotty internet this morning, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So at our board meeting this month, there's going to be a workshop on the intersection between land use policy and racial inequality. So we have an excellent speaker, Stephen Menendian. He's the policy director at the UC Berkeley Othering and Belonging Institute. And Dr. Menendian is going to cover more of the research on this topic, but just as a mean of introducing the topic writ large, I'm going to provide a little bit of background, some history here, and some context around why SACOG is engaging on this issue in the first place. So our region is racially diverse. It's one of the more racially diverse regions in the country, actually, but that diversity is still segregated across cities and neighborhoods. This is a racial dot density map. It's from the 2010 census. It's a little out of date now, but and I know it's a little bit hard to see here, so I'm going to zoom in here to the core of Sacramento, where you can pretty clearly see the white neighborhoods, which are sort of designated here in blue. And in many ways, our cities and neighborhoods are more segregated by race today than any time in our history. And unfortunately, housing policy has had a part in that. This is the redlining map in Sacramento. Is created by the federal government, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, to be exact. And it was created to provide home loans starting in the New Deal era. Entire books have been written about this era of housing policy. The Color of Law is probably the most famous of them. But just a couple important points to note here. First, non-white households were legally excluded from the quote unquote high demand neighborhoods, which in this map are the green and the blue neighborhoods, through legally enforceable racial covenants. So for example, the Elmhurst neighborhood in Sacramento is one of the blue neighborhoods there, had a covenant that read, "No persons of any race other than the white or Caucasian race shall use or occupy any structure except for domestic servants." And then a second thing to note, and I think this is probably how most folks think of redlining, non-white households were denied home loans in the red areas. And that's where most people of color lived at the time. And that denial was predicated on this thought that it was going to be a riskier loan for the government to hand out because of the neighborhood's racial composition. So for example, in West Sacramento, on the top left of the map there, the Washington neighborhood was redlined, noting that, quote, "The particular hazard is racial and that infiltration of subversive races has occurred." So as a result of this type of practice, between 1934 and 1962, 98% of the government-backed loans went to white households. Fortunately, these practices were eventually found unconstitutional, but the effects are still being felt today. This is wealth data here from 2019. It's sort of difficult to come by wealth data. We don't have it for the SACOG region, so this is at the national level. And it's showing that white households have about 8 times the median wealth of Black households. There's been a lot of research on the racial wealth gap nationally, and it indicates that housing equity and appreciation of that equity over time is a major contributor, and that intergenerational wealth transfers, so via inheritance of particularly property, make this gap extremely durable. So this gap is persisted for a long time now, and unfortunately, it's actually gotten larger. The gap has gotten larger in the last couple decades. So we no longer employ, I'm sorry here, so let's zoom in. Another factor at play is that, yes, redlining is illegal now, right? But we didn't exactly jump from the more explicitly racial policies to fully inclusive land use policy. And instead, cities across the country put in place zoning practices that exclude by income. So when we look at how the most desirable, quote unquote, green and blue neighborhoods from the redlining map are zoned today in our region, so this is data from our region, they are exclusively zoned for single family. You can see that on the left there. And then the former red lines neighborhoods towards the right are where you start to see the multifamily zoning, the non-residential zoning, the industrial sort of nuisance type zoning, right? So while we no longer employ explicitly racial zoning or redlining, much of our region and especially our most desirable neighborhoods can exclude more affordable housing types. And as a result, they actually remain relatively white and relatively wealthy. And yes, so much of our region as we know it didn't exist during redlining. I mean, certainly, there were, like historic Folsom and certain areas outside of city of Sacramento existed, but not to the extent of Sacramento at the time. And so, the redlining map that I provided was actually the only redlining map that existed in our region. But the point here is that the development patterns that created across the region by single family zoning and more restrictive zoning have led to some of the same exclusion by race and class that we see in the Sacramento core and that racial dot density map. And just to be clear, this is not unique to the Sacramento region. This is very common across the country, and it's so prevalent that the initial intention is not really that obvious. It's just sort of like, well, there's this inertia from doing something the same way that we've done it for 80 years. So why does that zoning matter? This is a chart showing the average income in the SACOG region by the type of housing the household lives in. So as you might expect, folks with higher incomes who can afford it, they tend to live in detached single family homes. And then folks with lower incomes tend to live in denser products depending upon their income. So in that attached housing. Townhomes, missing middle category there, that would be anything from 2 to 10 units, so like fourplexes and things like that. And then larger apartments would be like, 50 units type thing. And it's important to note here, fourplexes and apartments are illegal to build in upwards of 93% of the residentially designated land in the SACOG region, a much higher percent actually in if you think about just total land. So we've set up a system here where we zone for housing that is expensive and often out of reach on the vast majority of our land. So just to put a bow on this logical chain that we're laying out here, the original zoning ordinances combined with racial covenants and redlining were pretty explicitly racist in their intent. And then moving from there, these government policies are partly responsible, certainly not wholly, but partly responsible for wealth disparities by race, because non-white households just could not take advantage of those early subsidized mortgages and the property appreciation that came with them that white households were afforded. And this was just a generational windfall for white families. It helped create what we often think of as the American middle class. It built the foundation for these intergenerational investments, like a college education for their children. And this was a windfall that was simply not afforded to non-white households. Then when redlining and racial covenants were deemed unconstitutional, housing policy shifted from this explicit segregation by race to segregation by income via zoning practices. And by banning other housing types in the vast majority of these high demand, often whiter neighborhoods, it meant that households who could not afford to purchase a single family house, which is inherently going to be more expensive, right? Because it has larger unit sizes, higher land consumption. If you couldn't afford that, you were effectively shut out of certain neighborhoods. And then the key point here in black, which Dr. Menenian is going to be diving much deeper into this at the board workshop. It's really the focus of his presentation. Because non-white households couldn't build wealth through housing, restrictive zoning reinforces both economic and racial segregation, and it actually inhibits non-white households from accessing these high demand neighborhoods. And so the research here is showing that, regardless of its current intent, current housing policy is reinforcing the racial wealth gap. It's reinforcing some of the racial disparities that we talked about in the Regional Progress Report presentation to the board in January. So what does all this have to do with SACOG? Well, for one, coming out of the work last year with the Race Equity and Inclusion Working Group, we have a racial equity framework that lays the foundation for a sustained effort to address the racial inequities that are associated with some of the things that SACOG touches. Of course, housing and land use planning is certainly one of those things. But in addition to this voluntary effort by SACOG, we also just wanted to highlight that SACOG actually has a statutory obligation to do this as well. There were a couple bills that passed in 2018. The first was AB 686, and the second was AB 1771. And these bills enshrine in state law an obligation for public agencies, including SACOG, but also local governments, to administer their programs in a manner that, quote, affirmatively furthers fair housing. So affirmatively furthering fair housing, it's very difficult to say. I stumble over it whenever I give this presentation. It has a very long definition in statute there. The basic idea is that it's not enough to make explicitly discriminatory policies illegal. It sort of says that we're required to take proactive steps to actually affirmatively do this, to overcome the patterns of segregation we see and actually sort of remove barriers that restrict access to opportunity. So one of the first planning processes that this new rule was incorporated into at SACOG was the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, or RHNA, which is one of SACOG's key functions as a council of government. I know we have some RHNA veterans on this committee, but just for our new board members, just a very quick overview here. RHNA it's a state mandated planning process. It's been around for a while now. It's intended to ensure that we are zoning enough land to house everybody. And it's a 3-step process. It works, we do this every 8 years. And the first step in the cycle here is that the state would provide every region, including SACOG, a total number of units that the region needs to plan for. And then regions are then responsible for developing a methodology or a formula for distributing that number to each city and county. And we just wrapped this step up actually last year when the SACOG board adopted our RHNA plan last March. So that's now final, and we're in the final step now, which is happening as we speak. And cities and counties are responsible for adopting a housing element that demonstrates how they can actually accommodate their RHNA number in their zoning, and that's reviewed by the state. So when SACOG was developing the RHNA methodology, there was this whole suite of objectives that we needed to demonstrate to the state that we were accomplishing in our methodology, including that new affirmatively furthering fair housing objective. That was a new one. We were sort of, as many things on housing and RHNA, we, for whatever reason, are always sort of the guinea pig. It's sort of how the timing works out. So we were sort of the first region in the state to try to tackle this. And so how do we actually translate that really abstract definition you saw earlier into housing units in our methodology, a very sort of quantitative numbers-based process? Well, we approached it by thinking about where are the areas in our region that are high opportunity. And by that, I mean, where are the neighborhoods with great schools and amenities, access to jobs, low pollution burden? Well, these are the places where a child really has a chance to thrive if you grow up there. And if we're serious about affirmatively furthering fair housing, these are also the places where it actually makes a lot of sense to try to build more affordable housing types, so that everyone actually has access to that opportunity, regardless of your income or your race. So we worked with our stakeholders to look at all of the indicators there. We eventually settled on using an adapted version of what are called the opportunity area maps. So they're maps that are created by the state. And these maps, they give every census tract across the state a score. It's an index score. It's based on a whole suite of factors from economic, environmental, educational metrics. And then like the top tracks, the top index scores are considered high opportunity. or they use the phrase high resource, but same idea. And I know nobody signed up to do any math today. I won't go too far in the weeds here, but we took these high opportunity areas, we devised an adjustment factor in our methodology that said, if a jurisdiction has more of their existing housing in these high opportunity areas, they would get an upward adjustment of affordable RHNA units, which means that they would need to zone for more higher densities in their housing element. So more high opportunity means more affordable housing zoning. And the map on the right shows how that exercise shook out. With the greener the jurisdiction, the more high opportunity it was. The SACOG board has adopted this approach, as I mentioned last year. It's actually already been imitated in other regions throughout the state as they're going through their RHNA methodologies. In fact, it's been lauded by an independent research group as the best in the state on this particular objective. So of course that methodology was just to figure out how much each jurisdiction should be planning for. The actual implementation of that, which is the housing element, it's happening as we speak. I'm sure many of you in your respective jurisdictions have probably already had conversations at your local decision maker meetings about this. The housing elements are required to be adopted by May. There is some wiggle room on that, but most folks will be adopting by May. And local governments are also going to have to be grappling with this new requirement to affirmatively further fair housing in their housing elements. That was one of the components of AB 686. So you will be hearing more about this idea likely from your local staff as that planning process nears adoption. I should note, given the charge of this committee, that the state will be discussing long-term RHNA reform this year as that's a result from AB 101, which was the governor's budget trailer bill in 2019, I believe. And as a part of that, HCD is setting up a working group to bring together a variety of stakeholders for getting feedback on how to potentially reform RHNA. Of course, we are one of those stakeholders. So we're working with HCD to be included on that group. I think we will be. Between all of the changes to RHNA in the last few years that Christina has talked about over the last few years, combined with this long-term RHNA reform effort, HCD has actually indicated to the legislature to sort of hold off on any big RHNA bills. So for this year, so we don't anticipate any big legislation on this front this year, at least. So that was a very brief overview of how SACOG is already engaged on this intersection between housing policy and racial inequality. As I mentioned at the top, you will have an opportunity to dig much deeper into this topic at our board workshop later this month with Stephen Menendian. At this point, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, particularly about the RHNA methodology. I can do my best on the sort of the research stuff, but we can also take notes on some questions that you'd like to hear Dr. Menendian speak on as well, if I can't answer them.
Thank you, Dov. Director Stollard.
Yes, Dov, thanks for that outstanding presentation. It was very informative. Could you come back a couple of slides, please, of that map where you show the communities? They're doing a better job. That's pretty surprising to me. You've got Rancho Cordova and Woodland in relatively low numbers in opportunity areas. Isn't that correct? That's what orange is supposed to show?
Yeah, so this is, the colors are sort of like relative to other jurisdictions in the region. And just to be clear, it's not who's doing better. This is showing the percentage of existing housing units that fall within high opportunity areas in each jurisdiction.
What constitutes a high opportunity area? That was going to be my question. Could you clarify that?
I mean, Woodland's 4 square miles, is 4 miles on a side, 17 square miles, Nobody too far from anything in our town.
Right, yeah, so this is a big question, right? Because it's one thing to put that definition in statute, right? And then it's another to try to put it into practice and figure out what do these things actually mean. So I sort of referenced this, and I'd be happy to send the methodology for how the state puts this together. But we didn't have to use these maps. These are created by the State Fair Housing Task Force. But through our sort of work with our stakeholders and our local housing planners, we elected to use these maps because they're sort of a vetted product already, and it just made more sense than to sort of create our own, which can get kind of sticky.
Okay.
So,
Let me cut to the chase here.
Yeah.
If I can jump in again. So
Sure.
This has nothing to do with affordability. It's only the housing that's accessible to what are perceived as high opportunities.
Yeah, so the opportunity area maps and this adjustment factor, it's based on, what percentage of your housing is, has great schools, great access to amenities, a low pollution burden, great access to jobs. Think sort of the areas that if you were raising a kid, it would really set them up for success moving forward. And so,
okay.
Yeah.
Please send us the slide deck. At least I'd like it.
I think Tom's question is a good one, because when I was looking at it, the disparity between Rancho Cordova and Folsom seems a little unusual to me, given that we are geographically adjacent, basically have similar, we're similar in a lot of ways, and we share a school district. So at least on the education side of things, there's pretty high opportunity there. And in terms of, access to employment and everything, it's about the same, and pollution burden, I would suspect, is similar. So that one just jumped out at me as being an odd disparity.
Sure, I'd be happy to send it over. And to be clear, this is a summary of some of the metrics. It's a somewhat complicated formula that they come up with in terms of what everything that goes into it. So it's a public process as well, and they have this very large and detailed methodology for how they get there. So if you're interested, we can definitely dig into the differences.
I'm interested. I'm curious how they calculate that, because clearly they're putting some heavier weight on certain aspects of these categories.
Director Lozano?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. It goes to Vice Chair Kozlowski's last comment. What is the breakdown of the weighting of it? Clearly, it would seem to me, and I'm going to use his example, Folsom and Rancho Cordova, in terms of job access, it's pretty similar. And in terms of education, they have the same school district. So certainly down in Galt, access to jobs is probably one of the issues. But how is it weighted?
So I don't have the weighting offhand. Like I mentioned, I'd be happy to send the committee the full methodology and the website that has the interactive maps, and we can sort of dig into the different weighting formulas. But as I understand it, they try to weight each of these three domains equally, and then within each so the domain on the left, right, is like an economic based one. The middle is a sort of pollution burden, environmental based one, and the one on the right is an educational based one. And then within each one of those, they have a variety of metrics that they sort of envelope up into that larger domain. And then everything, of course, is then enveloped up into a single score. Yeah. And
then it is weighted against each of the jurisdictions within the region. Is that what I'm getting? Yeah. So there's two weightings happening here. Sorry. So this is the opportunity area maps, right? Created by the state, not necessarily explicitly for RHNA. They use this, for all kinds of things, including, if you're applying for affordable housing, you get a bonus if you're in a high opportunity area. So that's a state thing. Our RHNA methodology makes use of those maps to basically assess what percentage of each jurisdiction's units are in those areas, and then what is the regional average for those units that are, and then compared to the regional average, you're getting an adjustment. So Folsom is, as an example, above average. Most of Folsom falls within these high opportunity areas,
And then, another jurisdiction that has below average is sort of getting this downward adjustment, right? And then, and just to be clear, this is one of the adjustment factors we did. There's all these other things that we needed to think about in addition to fair housing. It's what makes RHNA extremely complicated. And it's part of why the state is sort of exploring what are different ways of thinking about this that maybe are a little bit less complicated.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Director Stollard.
Yeah, I just have to say, this seems absolutely backwards to me. I mean, the richest communities are going to get the special allocations because they're high opportunity, whereas the ones that are more socioeconomically challenged are going to not get them. And I mean,
So,
I don't understand the rationale here.
yeah, so let me try to be clear. So it's not special treatment. If you're one of these greener jurisdictions, you're getting an upward adjustment of lower income units, which means these jurisdictions will need to zone for higher densities, right? Because the policy objective here is to try to allow for more affordable housing in high opportunity areas so that everybody can access that opportunity.
So it's a greater burden for Folsom than it is for Woodland, for example.
That's
Is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't characterize zoning for more housing as a burden, but it often can be considered that. I think the idea is, again, we want to try to make sure that if there are like big disparities, we want the places that are highest opportunity to allow for more affordable housing types.
Well, I think it's obviously we need more housing, but I have to respectfully say, the greatest challenge for Woodland is the constant additional requirements put on housing that comes out of the state legislature, including solar on every new unit. I can go for solar ready, but to actually require solar adds about 10,000 to every job. And it just keeps going on and on and on, all the additional requirements. And we have a challenge getting builders to build in Woodland. We still haven't built a market rate, multiple unit, multifamily project since 2014. And the money is going to where the opportunities are greatest economically. Sacramento's been very successful, as are many of the other communities in this picture. So, I feel like we're being squeezed, like we're not doing the job, when in fact the job gets harder all the time. And then there's this group, the Uniform Building Code Commissioners, that every 3 years seem to kick out all kinds of new requirements, whether they're important or not. Meanwhile, we have all these buildings that have been here forever. They're still totally functional, but the new buildings become almost cost prohibitive because of these additional building requirements. I wish the legislature would take on that task, and we ought to start talking about it. It's the cost of building that is making building so hard to do. I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Yes, Mike.
There may be a perverse incentive, Tom, at play where the more expensive you make new housing, the more likely you are to reutilize existing buildings, which in terms of AB 370 or SB 375 and environmental goals is actually a righteous target to try and meet.
But I'm gonna have to tell you guys, I'm just finishing a rehab of a building on Main Street. It'll have 7 units in it. Each of them is going to cost what I could have built a small house for.
Oh gosh.
Anybody wants to come to Woodland and walk through it with me, and I'll tell them the whole story. I'm only doing it because it needed to be done, and I believed it was important to my community. But there's nobody else doing it. It's just the costs are so prohibitive. It's just unbelievable. I hadn't realized how much harder it is to do infill than bare land. So, I'd like to see where the big successes are happening in our region in infill, because it's so costly. And now the only reason you can, and the truth of the matter is, my housing will not be affordable housing units. They're going to be expensive apartments, lofts. There's no choice. They'll rent because people want them. But I can't claim it's affordable housing. So, I just don't know how we do this. We have a developer who's tried to do 161 multifamily market rate unit. He's been working on it for 4 years and he can't get the lending on it. And we've done everything we can to help him. We've reduced the affordable requirement. We've done everything we can do, and still they can't make it pencil with private lenders. Now, I do not know, I mean, I don't know who's going to come build affordable housing in Galt, Rich. I just don't know. And,
I met with somebody the other day. It's a nonprofit, and they're looking at doing a 3-story unit with affordable senior housing, and they're getting they're probably going to get funding that's other than what you would normally get. And you're right, there aren't the developers knocking down the doors to do this, and it's actually pretty sad.
Well, I think it's also sad is that every new home in our new home subdivisions, every new home has $11,000 added into it to go to an affordable housing fund for the city. My attitude is, why should they alone be providing this housing? Why isn't all of society paying the cost of affordable housing? A lot of these are young families getting into their first house, and they're carrying a load that guys like me don't have to pay. I just don't get it. Look at you, James. You're the big guy here.
I was just going to say, James, if you had any comments from the comments here, I think we can foresee there'll be a lively conversation when the doctor gives his presentation to the full board as well.
It always is, and I know we appreciate you all digging into this issue. Let me try to just back up for a second. And Director Stollard, I certainly, as I know many of us do, appreciate what you're trying to do in Woodland. Generally speaking, as a elected leader, but also as a developer, and how hard it is. And I know when it comes to the topic of housing, we could spend hours on why is it so damn difficult to build housing in California, right? So let's just back up for a second, because just to sort of, and we appreciate you jumping into the numbers and high opportunity areas. So let's take kind of 2 data points to remind us kind of that you are here on the big map, especially for some of our new board members. First and foremost, and I know this SACOG board, even if it changes over time, we have a blueprint right from 2004 that says we need a diversity of housing product types. And one of those product types that we need badly is attached housing. I think what Doc gave you this morning is a lens on racial equity and racial disparities and the history of racial exclusion, basically saying we need to do what we can to open up areas in our region to make sure that it's easy to do multifamily, that it's easy to do attached. There's all kinds of reasons to do that. One of them is to try to actually narrow this racial wealth gap in terms of housing, and the progress report you got at the board meeting last month showed you that. Green Means Go, as Christina was giving you the update on, it's only part, but part of also our regional initiative to try to make it easier to get some of this attached product built, right, in the right places. And the opportunity overlay is also saying your zip code matters. And if you're in a really good zip code, the research shows you really do better if you're in a good zip code with high opportunities. It's not that anybody in orange and red isn't a good community. It's that we need to really make sure that if we are excluding multifamily, historically we've excluded it in high opportunity areas, we need to do what we can to try to actually welcome that and make it legal and create all the incentives. We're not going to solve this overnight, but to allow it, create the incentives to encourage it in the right communities, in the right places, so that it's kind of a win-win-win, right, for these multiple goals that we have. So I just, I personally think it's, there's a lot of data that Dob gave you. Obviously, it was a data-rich presentation, one of which is how much of our region you actually can't build multifamily in. And this is the year, remember, of the housing element updates. It's the year really of a big push around housing for us to get creative about how we might problem solve. And then we realize there's a lot to do in terms of trying to make it financially more logical to actually do this stuff, so it's not so expensive. So anyway, just wanted to give the bigger picture.
Thank you, James. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Tom.
I'm just hunting for any picture James, that will make sense, that's doable, that's affordable and buildable. And, just throwing more requirements on us from Sacramento isn't going to get us there. I'm on the league's policy committee on housing too. This is going on everywhere. And it's just constantly this, the state says we're not doing the job, and we're saying we can't do the job. We're set up. Truthfully, I think there are jurisdictions in California, not a few, that are exclusionary, intentionally exclusionary, and they're just going to do everything they can to keep it that way. But I just don't want to have all of us who are really trying hard to get dragged along with more requirements, more burdens, when we really could use some targeted help. And I feel like a significant bond, housing bond with money that's available to match based on reasonable criteria, that would make the difference. Any affordable project in this community, they come to the city and they want an allocation. To get 39 more units, we put about $2.2 million in the project, completely cleaned out our affordable housing fund. And that's the last thing that was built. It was Mutual Housing of California that did it. So, we're not seeing the private sector do it. They just can't make it pencil. Now, I suppose in high wealth communities where everything's so valuable, you can claim the rents on the market part of your projects to support the costs for the subsidized portion. In a community like Woodland, you're not going to get $2,000 a month for apartments just anywhere in this community. So, it's economics, and we really should be talking economics, I think. Okay, I really have done.
Look, I appreciate
more time today.
I think this really is about, let's do what we can, the tools we have as local governments to make it easier. Let's re-examine our zoning and attached product and making sure that we are welcoming attached and multifamily housing where it makes sense, right? I look, you're the policy committee. And I would suggest, as your first meeting of the year ahead, let's think big on policy, right? What would it take to be a pilot project for the state to actually waive some of those requirements that make it more expensive? What would it take to maybe have a Bay Area style housing finance corporation that we consider for the 6 counties, which is what the Bay Area just got through legislation a couple of years ago. So it's not that believe me, we're not trying to make it more difficult for you all as local governments or developers to do the right thing. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in the big picture to tackle some of these issues that you're bringing up that are related to, but not directly to sort of the topic of what Dov was talking about, if that makes sense. So I guess.
Thank you.
It does. Director Gog, then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say this is a really informing presentation. It really opened up my mind to how kids are affected by all this. I went to a school where we're on the top of the list with the 0 opportunities in the area. We didn't have any jobs over here. We didn't have much of a housing back in the 70s, but we're doing good on multifamily houses, low income houses. We're like at the state level right now. But when you talk about opportunity, there's no jobs here. I mean, I worked for $1 an hour on the farm for years before they went to $2.10 an hour, But my daughter teaches in West Sacramento area. And talk about kids in trouble. She's a high school teacher. I mean, you got kids coming in there very poor, drugged out, they're violent, they go in the bathroom doing drugs, and overall, they're hungry, they don't get enough food. And it really breaks my heart to know that we cannot take care of these problems that our fabric, our society is getting just washed away every day by lack of our attention to our coming generation. I don't know if I made any sense or not, but I'm going to stop right there. And I do appreciate, I really did. I learned a lot from today's presentation, and let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
If I could just, I'm sorry. If I could just respond to that, I think it makes a lot of sense. Thank you for the comments. And one thing I just wanted to remind folks on the RENA front, the only lever that RENA really pulls is to sort of remove regulatory barriers to building more housing, right? And so on that long definition that you saw to affirmatively further fair housing, you know, all we can really do on that front is to try to change zoning practices in the high opportunity areas so that's what we did in that. But of course, the other side of the coin is investing in the disadvantaged areas, right? And so, yeah, I think that has to be a part of the conversation. And I just want to be clear that I didn't include it just because it's not something that RENA can really have an impact on.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
I was just going to say, we started this presentation off with sort of a discussion of redlining and structural, the structures from the past that have echoes into now. And it's probably, maybe it's overstating it, but to Tom's point about the layering on of cost of all kinds for development of all kinds, in a way precludes the development that we really want from happening in certain parts of the area, right? So there's a lot of work to be done on sort of institutional expectations of what's for the greater good. So if you're building, just as a gross example, if you're building multifamily housing anywhere, is it really absolutely in the best interest of the people that will live in those houses to have solar panels on the roof of those houses or that multifamily house? Is it really, the highest and best use of the dollars that we have available to us to put fire sprinklers in all of those places? So this is not unlike the fact that cars cost 4 or 5 times as much in the US as they do in China, because our desire to have perfect overwhelms our desire to have satisfactory. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of a ranging comment, but it's part of the puzzle. I mean, we're creating institutional barriers to building affordable housing, and we've had some successes recently in Folsom, but it was a particular developer who is well acquainted with this, and it was the institution, their ability to tap into federal loan funds and our, much more well-funded, developer fee pool for a loan as well, that made it happen. And ours is about to be tapped out also, just like Woodlands. So we, for many years, may not be able to see more of those projects happen. So.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and same thing from my perspective. When we look at those bands that, middle and single family homes and others, and the more costs you put onto those, the more likely you're going to get people of color that are in those other bands. And the ability for them to have that generational wealth transfer is to get them into something that's ownership. But if you can never get out of that sort of low income or affordable housing strip, it becomes incredibly difficult to build that generational wealth. And so I think that's something that we have to look at. While we want to be able to get people into types of housing, you also want to get them into housing that's an ownership track. Otherwise, you just miss out on that generational wealth, no matter what your intentions or how good they are. And you end up having the same results, even though they're not as explicit as back in the days when you had redlining. That was an explicit prohibition against people of color living in certain communities. As Dov showed us, it still ends up being almost the same case because of the high levels of getting into those. So, as we talk about this, solar, all those I think are germane, because the more expensive you get, especially when we're talking about communities of colors, the more roadblocks you're going to put into getting into that ownership band.
Yeah. There's no starter house available.
No.
Period.
Not at all.
In the classic sense,
Yeah, I mean, even when I bought our first house, we were both state workers, or we worked for legislators, but we were able to get in with like 1% down on a CalPERS loan that, you know, doesn't exist anymore. And that was about as starter as you could get back then. And then, you know, those opportunities are just very few and far between for people to get into. Any other comments, questions from the board, staff? All right, Dov, thank you so much for the presentation. We're looking forward to the doctor and to the full board's discussion on this. Hopefully we provided some feedback to anticipate, I think, some of the questions that may arise at the larger meeting as well.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Okay.
If members are interested in a copy of Dov's presentation, it is on our website with the agenda packet.
Thank you, Renee. And did we have any public comments?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to then move on to our receive and file, which is our 2021 Sacramento County investment policy for the pooled investment fund. Was there any questions on this one? I know it's a receive and file, but just wanted to see if there was any out there. All right, seeing none. Any other matters that directors would like to bring up? All right, so moving right along then, our next meeting will be on Monday, March the 8th. And in the meantime, I will, I'm sure, talk to some of you. Oh yes, Director Gog.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, want to share some information about myself, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I know a lot of people like Tom. He's seen me when I didn't have any hair on my face, and I've had a haircut all my life, and and you're probably wondering what's going on in my life. And last October, my dad passed away from farm accident, right back our property. And at that time, after the ceremony and everything, the turban was passed on to me in my family because I was the eldest and I was the most responsible. So the family missions was given to me to carry on forward. And I was given the turban, and rather than put the turban in the closet, I put the turban on my head and I let my beard grow. And I'm not a big religious fanatic, but I do live in fear of God all the time. So that's my story. I want you guys to know. And if you have any question about me, please feel free to ask me.
Hey, Lockfair, we're
Yes,
better
sir.
because you're here.
Well, I'm better because I'm with you guys.
Yes, no,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lockford, and especially in this age of, you know, remote and Zoom meetings where we don't get to actually interact in person. I really appreciate the personal story as well. It gives us a chance to humanize ourselves a little bit more in this virtual environment. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Why don't we ask Portia to say a couple words too, and our Roseville rep and Trinity, the other new people. It'd be nice to know more about them. Just a couple minutes that it would.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll start. Portia Middleton, 2 boys, distance education, on my way to Oakland to see my grandpa, and really learning a lot with SACOG, especially with this policy committee, and just the amount of work that we have to do as a region to really meet the needs of our constituents is enormous. And I'm very honored and privileged to be sitting right here with all of you, especially the ones who have been here for a while, to help me kind of get a better understanding of what's going on. So I appreciate you guys really taking the time to go through it and asking really thoughtful questions. Just because I'm not talking doesn't not mean I'm not taking it all in and listening and really absorbing. And I will have a lot more questions probably at the board meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you, Portia.
Portia.
Anybody else?
Go ahead and go.
Yep.
My name's Trinity, and you guys know I'm with Colfax. So I'm actually from the Sacramento area myself. I actually grew up in Orangeville, and I was actually a foster kid in the Sacramento CPS system. And, you know, I'm not even 10 years out of foster care, and I think I'm doing pretty well. But that's a lot of my motivation for being in public office and wanting to be part of this board and this specific committee is, just wanting to make sure that we're paying it forward and trying to make the world a better place.
Thank you, Trinity. Yes, Director God.
Yes, I'd like to add a little bit more onto my story. So my ancestors came here on a ship in 1900 and they landed in Seattle. And from there, they took a stagecoach to Live Oak, but they were dropped off in Butte County and Gridley, nearby town. From there, they decided to walk to Live Oak, and there they started farm labor jobs. And all my family basically were all located in Live Oak at that time. We were not allowed to buy any property. And so my ancestors, they bought the property under a Spanish friend's name that was trustworthy. He says, okay, well, here's everything that we got. So they built all their farming land and had it under somebody else's name till the thing was legalized. And then that guy was trustworthy enough to transfer everything back to them. And meantime, while they're over here, they had signs up all in the area that job opportunities, we're hiring, but we're not hiring anybody from India. No Hindus allowed. And we're not Hindus, we're Sikhs. But at that time, people didn't know nothing about the Sikhs. They knew about the Hindus, that the most popular people in India. And so everywhere they went, this is no Hindus can allow for a job. And that's the kind of background that I came here with, but I love this country. It's a beautiful country and we need to work to improve it as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gug. And it reminds me of just a 1-minute story is during World War II and the internment camps that the United States put the Japanese into, many of them were farmers in the Valley, and kind of a similar circumstance where a lot of the Latinos that worked for them actually caretook the farms and ended up operating them until after they were out of the internment camp. So there's always, we work for a group called the Nisei Farmers League, and there's always been a very special relationship between the Niseis and their descendants and the Latino farmers. Based on that, just it was really a handshake. There was nothing until they were able to come back. Otherwise, they may have lost everything. So it reminded me of that when you brought that up, Director Gog. So thank you. Okay, well, for us veterans, and especially Director Stollard, for everybody that's new, please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions, or whether it's on this committee or just in general. We're happy to walk through our experiences with you. Yes, Director Stollard.
If I could mention too, Lynette will be preparing a roster of all of us, and please put your cell phones on it. It's so easy for us to pick up the phone and call you if you have your cell phone there, or text you. So. And use that list. If you see something good going on somewhere else in the region, call Mike Kozlowski. All the good things are going on there in Folsom. Actually, good things are going on everywhere, and we benefit from our collegiality. So I look forward to getting my copy of that list. When you get yours, call somebody.
Chair,
Make it
yes.
At the risk of extending this meeting further, because I'm just enjoying it too much. And for some of our new members, Director Gog, thank you for sharing. Thank you for just, really over Zoom to be so heartfelt and share, a very personal story about you. It's certainly very helpful to me. And for all of you, the coming in from last year, and Chair Saragosa, you and I talked quite a bit about this. The board took on a race equity inclusion framework, and so much of that, I think, was about finally trying to talk about race, racial equity, racial inclusion, horrible histories, where we go from here as an opportunity in a very genuine and heartfelt and honest way. In some ways, it's about beginning to use a muscle that I don't think we have as a region, but if we can flex this muscle and use it to talk about race and inclusion, we will be so much better off as a region. And the theme this year really about this framework is to listen, to learn, and to measure, to set up for more intentional work around racial inclusion going forward. And I I feel like you all have modeled that this morning on this committee very unexpectedly, especially some of the newer members here. And I just want to say thank you. We really appreciate this from staff, and I think also our intention with Dobbs' presentation was to give all of us some reminder of the history of housing discrimination and the structural racism in housing, but not to make us feel bad, to make you understand, okay, here's how we can intentionally try to actually provide more opportunity going forward, to be intentional, to have this conversation very above board and very truthfully. So again, I just really appreciate the conversation and look forward to the work of this committee in the year ahead.
Thank you, James. I'll echo that, and feel like I can go on to the rest of my day feeling rather uplifted after the end of this meeting, where sometimes they may not have that same feeling. So again, thank you, everybody. We will go ahead then and adjourn this meeting at 11:29 today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, you too.
It was a nice first meeting.
Thank you.